Well, hello there. Someone says focus and concentration. Everybody has an idea what that means. Two principles of focus and concentration. Actually, this is an important video. Two different methodologies. However, the correct type, as mentioned both by the Greeks and the Indians, and commanded by Advaita Vedanta, original Buddhism, Plotinus, the Pythagoreans, is technically not concentration or focus at all. Is it the opposite of that? No, it's a completely different thing altogether. When someone thinks of concentration, they might usually typically be thinking of some sort of object, in hand or otherwise, like, look, I'm focusing in on this. This is an object, I'm concentrating on it, I'm focusing in on it, and of course it is an object. What if that which, of course, is to be liberated is, of course, subjective? It's not empirical. It's not phenomena, of course. It can't be focused on in a conventional sense. What about retroduction or apophatism? I can't stand the word meditation for many thousands of reasons, and I've explained this many times. And there's no definition for it. You can go on Wikipedia, you can go into any dictionary. I wrote an article about it, and the link is below, and it will tell you flat out, there's no agreed upon definition of this word. Essentially, it's meaningless. We actually get the word meditation from the Greek term melite, which in Latin is meditatio, and then we get the word meditation. And it's actually a ritual. Everybody is doing the wrong thing. We're supposed to be doing the Greek word mneme, which is recollection. Not conventional recollection, but apophatism via negativa. What instead of a different type of concentration or focus, we were talking about something completely different. Now, I'm not interested in eating the pulp of this orange, which I've eaten tons of orange pulp. I eat slices of oranges. Certainly not interested in the rind of this orange. What if I was only interested in the juice? Yeah, I can't see the juice. I know it's in there, obviously, so drill a little hole in it, or I can cut it in half and use one of those juicers and extract out. Wouldn't that be concentration? I'm taking what is diluted amongst the pulp and the mass that is this orange, of course, right? I'm making it more concentrated. In other words, per a unit volume relative to this orange, I could take the only thing that I want, which is the juice, and extract it out, assuming that the juice is of one thing only, which of course is not. Juice is made of many different components. And of course the juice is also, too, an object, a liquid. In this case, we're talking about subjective ontology. We're talking about taking what the juice is, which is diluted amongst the totality of this orange and amongst the pulp. Yeah, it's diluted. When I say concentration, everybody thinks of concentration in this sense. Yeah, I'm going to focus in on it. How are you going to focus in on something that is pure subjectivity? It's not an object for you to hold and to witness. People said, well, what is anamnesis? What is apophatism? What is the via negativa, the neti-neti? What is theurgy? And I say, what is the opposite of dilution? The juice is already diluted amongst this orange and the pulp, is it not? I say, what's the opposite of dilution? Concentration? Kind of like concentrated orange juice, right? The only thing I want to drink is the orange juice. I'm not interested in this other stuff. Also, too, it's kind of important because people worry about consciousness and think about consciousness. And I've said a million times that you cannot think your way out of a thinking box, correct? You can't think your way out of a thinking box. We're talking about extraction of the nous, the mind, the spirit, the chitta, the spirit, the sanctum. It goes by many different names, from that which amongst it is diluted. Consciousness is the consubstantiality of spirit and matter, right? There's no such thing as purification of that which has a beginning in time and an end in time, i.e. consciousness. It's diluted amongst, just as the juice is diluted amongst this massive orange, and the pulp and the tissue that is inside of this orange. I'm only interested in one thing. This orange is the consubstantiality of the juice and the pulp. We can say the pulp is also to the rind, right? We have an orange. We have conscious being, Bob, Sue, Larry, so on and so forth. So people need to spend some time and think about the word concentration and the different types of concentration or focus. Focus upon what? You can't focus upon it objectively. It's not an object. True theurgy is both hyperlogical and hyperrational. Focus in meditation, of course, is meaning in both implication, connotation, and implied object. People are say, well, I do meditation, and I don't care what anybody does. It's none of my business what makes anybody happy. Or they'll tell me the fallacy, well, I do it, and I blank my mind out, and I sit on a zafu zabutan, and I feel better. It's like, well, yes, you do, but that's not what is commanded, and it has nothing to do with theurgy or disobjectification. You know, you could sit there in the radio analogy, right? And the radio analogy is nearly perfect. When people talk about the word meditation, which is a word I never use because it has no definition at all. That's not my opinion. There's no definition for that nonsensical word. I told you where the word meditatio comes from, which is where we get the word meditation. It comes from the word melite, which means a practice or a ritual. Rituals and practices are not apophaticism, they're not theurgy, they're not what is commanded. And what is hyperlogical and hyperrational. Speaking of this radio and using a meditation analogy, yeah?
Frequency mode.
Yeah. You'll like on your car radio, for example, you can adjust the tone, the pitch, the volume, the bass, and the treble. Right? We know what we're talking about. You're not doing anything that is making effectuation, i.e. liberation on the path thereof, closer or proximal to the signal. The signal is everywhere, here, and nowhere, right? The signal, right? Do you think, when you turn on the radio...
Frequency mode.
An hour. Chance of rain near 100%.
Oh, look at me.
Friday night.
Adjusting the volume, pitch, bass, or treble. You're doing anything that brings you in better concentration, i.e. proximity, to the signal? Just think about that for a second. Are you? You're not. You're affecting something that's consubstantial to the radio and the output from the speaker, i.e. the broadcast. Anytime you adjust the tone, bass, treble, volume, and whatnot, are you doing anything that brings you closer to the signal? Concentrating the signal, not that the signal can be concentrated. So, concentration, once again. What's the opposite of dilution? So I don't understand theurgy. So what's the opposite of dilution? Concentration. Okay, what sort of concentration? When you say concentration, people once again are thinking of this. Versus concentrating. I want the orange juice, right? I want cutting a hole in the orange, you're squeezing out the juice, the only thing that I want. You're concentrating the juice. You're making it more proximal to itself and that which it ultimately is. When people think of orange juice, oranges are mostly used for juice, not for, eating oranges where you're eating the pulp and whatnot. Don't take that analogy too far. Proximity to the signal, of course, requires demodulation. A signal, of course, has a transverse footprint and modulation. Frequency and wavelength, is that not the case? Frequency and measured in the wavelength, 144 megahertz, for example, on that. Wisdom is just a silly word that means self-proximity. There is no signal without modulation because no signal exists, nor is it a signal by definition. A signal is implied electromagnetic radiation. It has a modulation with a footprint, a spatial footprint, which is measured in its transverse electrical magnetic component, and that is how any radio and every radio on this earth tunes a signal, for example. That modulation is no different than primordial agnosis, i.e. ignorance, but not terrestrial ignorance, rather transcendent ignorance. It can't be objective. Let's just go down this simple, short little list. You just apply since true theurgy is hyper-rational and hyper-logical. Yeah. True theurgy, it can't be what you're actually aiming for. The transcendent nous or spiritus sanctum, the soul, so on and so forth, that which you truly are, as meant aham brahmasmi or tattva amasi. It can't be objective, right? It can't be. It's pure subjectivity. So you can't focus on it, you can't find it. Because if you can find it, then it's objective, and that ain't it, obviously so. It can't be done via thinking. You can't think your way out of a thinking box. You can't be brought more proximal to it. That's like trying to end the burning of trees by burning wood, because thinking is no different than burning wood in your mind. I'm going to stop burning trees and I'm going to think really hard how to do it. It's like you're just burning more wood, right? Can't be done via thinking. It can't be centered in consubstantial consciousness, which has a beginning in time and end in time and is composite. It's a composite of spirit and matter. It's technically the new sort of the chitta, many different names and different languages. It can be focused upon, hence implying object, which is what people do. Ooh, I'm going to concentrate on it. So what are you concentrating on? They're sitting there overclocking their brain. Now they do, some people actually engage in shikantaza. It's basically blanking their mind out, and it has an effect no different than taking substances that, you know, prevent anxiety. You know, pick your substance, which I don't do substances, okay? Pick your substances that stop you from thinking, you know, de-stresses you, turns you into a bowl of Jell-O. We know what we're talking about, and it's so helpful. It's like, I know it's helpful, but that is not what theurgy is. You have no more wisdom than when you started it. The only difference is you're more calm now. Well, yeah, I'm more calm. That's why I do it. So you're not actually interested in true wisdom or fundamental ultimate liberation. You're just interested in de-stressing from daily life. Well, I never thought about it that way before, but you're right. I need to like put these on when I'm like imitating the foolish person. Do I have them here? I don't know where they are. Oh, they're over there. I'll do that for a later video. They're googly eyes, actually. Put the googly eyes, imitating somebody. True focus or true concentration is decentration. Yeah. Aren't you decentering out the dilution of the orange juice from amongst the pulp in this orange? True focus, true apophaticism via negativa, true theurgy is decentration. This is not focus, rather, of course, wisdom, purification, or self-proximity, i.e. purity of spirit. Necessitatively, this is hyper-rational and hyper-logical. True metaphysics is hyper-rational and hyper-logical. True focus is heaping it closer together by eliminating out what divides it. What divides it, of course, is primordial agnosis. What scatters it? The desires, the ignorances, the modulation of spirit, that which you ultimately are, which is not that thing in the bathroom mirror when you brush your teeth. Here's a couple passages, just 3 passages, okay? My spirit, or nous, or chitta, in this case, chitta, Dignikaya 1.84, is emancipated from desire, kama, not karma, or kama, kama. Desire, emancipated from becoming, bhava. Becoming is just a fancy spiritual metaphysical word for modulation. Bhava, bhava in vritti. Vritti in bhava just means perturbation or modulation. Just like our frequency. Emancipated from primordial agnosis, avidya, emancipation. At last, there exists no more fruit more excellent than this. This is immortality, that being the liberated nous or chitta, which does not cling, anupadaya, no more clinging. This means elimination of modulation. That's Majjhima Nikaya 2.265. Here's another passage. Sthitam chittam ajatam susantitam suvimutam. Samhita Nikaya 5.74. With the nous or spirit or chitta steadfast upon itself, this very soul is supremely steadfast, is thoroughly liberated. Titam chatam ajatam susantitam suvimutam. Oh, I think they had like an ambulance across the street. There's a blinking light. I was like, what on earth is going on over there? Modulation. Bhava nirodha nabhanam. Suvimutta chittasanabhanam, or yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Bhava nirodha nabhanam. Nirvana means the subjugation of becoming or modulation. Yoga is vritti nirodha, the subjugation of perturbations of the chitta. In other words, the signal is sentient, and it eliminates out its modulation. Vritti nirodha. Nirvritti, i.e. means nirvana. Subjugation of perturbation. Isn't that hyperlogical? Isn't that incredibly rational? Spatial consciousness. Scattered and consubstantial. That would be the consubstantiality of the juice and the pulp, for example, which would be synonymous with existential consciousness. Ikagachitasa is a Pali compound word. It just means counterspatial chitta, or singularity of chitta. What's the distinction between a light bulb and a laser? Say 5-watt light bulb, 5-watt laser. This isn't 5 watts. This is like 200 milliwatts, for example. 200 milliwatt light bulb, I think there's a little tiny one that actually exists. It's basically invisible. This will actually burn out the back of your eye. It's not that powerful, but it'll still actually permanently blind if you get a decent exposure from it. What's the distinction? Isn't it the case that the light is not self-centered? Is it not a point source entity? This would be the red light. Now, white light on this orange, you see orange light. White light on a blue wall, you see blue light. White light on a red wall, you see this red on this orange. You still see the red light, right? This brownish rock, this red laser on the right. It does not take up attribution of anything it comes into contact with. Wouldn't this be no different than the removal of modulation? Of course, this light is modulated. It has a frequency, but that's taking the analogy too far. The point being, it is point source. It is literally the chitta or nous or spirit, which is based and directed in counter space. It is absent modulation. It no longer identifies with, it no longer has desires with the list. Desires, becoming, tanna is also desire. There's kama and tanna, which both mean desire. Becoming, bhava, which is just modulation. Bhava and vritti both mean modulation or becoming. Becoming and modulation, modulation and becoming, both one and exactly the same thing. You know they actually created lasers before genuine lasers exist? I mean holograms, excuse me. You know how they created holograms before lasers existed? They used mercury arc lamp and they used a pinhole aperture, which gave it a spatial coherence, since it was then it was spatially coherent. And then in that case, they actually didn't use a wavelength filter, since it was at one type of frequency. But you can actually create holography using ultra bright white illumination. You need a pinhole aperture, which creates a spatial coherence, and then you need a wavelength filter, which creates a self-consistent. So not only is now point source, it is self-consistent of one frequency, and you can actually create holograms without lasers. Liberation and apophatism and theurgy, or meneme, they're apophatism, they're via negativa, not conventional recollection like what I ate yesterday. Look up Platonic recollection, look up meneme. It goes by many different names with Greek, Indian, and Pali. It is about extraction through the removal of modulation. And you also, too, spend a half an hour. If you want to know far better than most people what true concentration means as pertains theurgy, you need to think about the concentration in my orange analogy versus the concentration that everybody else thinks about. They think, well, I'm going to concentrate on this. It's an object. Well, it's not an object, so you can't concentrate on it that way. They think of concentration, once again, in an objective sense. But concentration in that it is de-centered, as the juice is de-centered from the dilution amongst the pulp and the mass of this orange. That is the true focus or true concentration. But people always think concentration, they think of focusing in on an object because that's what everybody's done their entire lives. This is not focus in a conventional sense, i.e. objective. It is metaphysical focus, which is decentration. Apophatism or via negativa is decentration. Wisdom being self-proximity. Self-proximity is decentration from that which the spirit is scattered amongst due to desires, primordial ignorances, the primordial nature of vritti niroda, the subjugation of the perturbations of the chitta, which of course gives forth the stings and blisters that we suffer of this life. We're worried about the things passing that must pass because they have a beginning in time, and thence, of course, hence an end in time, on and on and on. There must be an ambulance out there picking somebody up. There's these flashing lights. It's an ambulance, or it could be a fire truck. I gotta check that out. But it was the end of the video anyway. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good night.